The bird photography is going absolutely crazy today. We are out here on the Kaua'i coastline photographing the Koa'e Ula. And yeah, there's like a bunch of them flying right in front of me. There's like a couple of them landing here. Oh my God, it's crazy. They're landing at their nest, I think. I actually came to this spot a few weeks ago and there was a fledgling, and I was able to grab a few shots of the fledgling with the Koa'e Ula, the adult Koa'e Ula in flight. And those shots, I was absolutely overjoyed after shooting them, but it's super crazy. Yeah, they're like right in front of the nest here. Holy smokes, that's so cool. On their baby. Because yeah, it is a bittersweet day to be a bird photographer, especially if you're a photographer who loves photographing these guys, the Koa'e Ula, because not necessarily in this part of the coast, but an area a little bit further down, closer to Lanai Lookout. There's a recent story on the news that broke that said that there were 21 total birds, both adults as well as chicks of the Koa'e Ula, that were found dead, killed by feral cats. When I woke up this morning and saw that story, of course I was like heartbroken, because these birds are one of my favorite birds to photograph. And I was immediately thinking of this fledgling that was over here, just a few days ago. And I was wondering, oh, I hope the fledgling survived. I hope it was able to kind of survive the cat attacks that were going on. And it looks like it has, or at least the adults have kind of survived, and they're still very much still active in this area. And they're kind of nesting in around the same location. So fingers crossed that's good, that the cats haven't gotten to them yet. But in today's video, I kind of wanted to talk about a couple of things. The first being how I captured the shot of both the fledgling and the adults in one particular shot, how we as photographers can capture photos that can tell better stories to showcase these birds, as well as how we can take a more active role in conservation. Man, so close. 300 is too tight. So typically when we photographers shoot birds, we try to go for like the portrait style of wildlife photography. We shoot with our lenses with its aperture wide open. In this case, I was shooting with my lens wide open at f2.8. Our shutter speed's super fast because we have to freeze the action for whatever it is that we're photographing. In addition to that, we also want to try and keep our ISO as low as we possibly can in order to make sure that we don't introduce a whole lot of noise in our photographs. So it's kind of about that balancing act between shooting at a fast enough shutter speed to freeze the action, but a low enough ISO to make sure that our images are pretty noise-free. But the problem that I found with trying to photograph these guys at those narrower apertures like f2.8, f4, and f5.6 is that when I took a photograph of the adult's Koa'e Ula, the foreground that included the fledgling was out of focus and blurred because I have my lens opened up to its widest aperture, most shallow depth of field, and it wasn't able to get both the adult and the fledgling in focus. So what I ended up doing was using a little bit of my landscape photography skills in a wildlife photography setting. I stopped down my aperture to something a little bit more reasonable to try and get everything in focus, like f8 and f11. And I dropped my shutter speed down from 1/4000th of a second, because that's how fast my shutter speed needed to be to capture this much light in the scene, to something, again, more reasonable, like 1/1000th of a second. It was still fast enough to freeze the action, but it wasn't super fast that it would just darken the image overall, especially when paired with those narrow apertures. That, of course, required my ISO to be jacked up a little bit higher, closer to typical low light wildlife photography settings, ISO 2000, 32,000, 6400, that kind of thing. But of course, we can use noise reduction in post to make sure that we make images that are relatively noise-free. And what that allowed me to do is capture a single image of both the adult Koa'e Ula as well as the Koa'e Ula fledgling in the foreground and get the entire frame in focus. Of course, my background was not as blurred as the f2.8 shots, but I think it still created for a better storytelling shot when I was able to get both of the animals in focus, even though they're on two different planes of focus. Sure, I could have done a technique called focus stacking, where I take a shot of the foreground, which included the fledgling, and then waited for the adult Koa'e Ula to come into frame, and then take a shot of him as well, and kind of blend those two images. But at that point, I didn't really feel like a focus stack was kind of warranted, especially when I could actually stop down my lens to a more narrower aperture to get everything in focus. So I just decided to do that. It was a little bit easier, less stuff going on in post-processing. And I think overall, the image of both the adult and the fledgling together, focused all in one shot, just tells a better story of the two birds and the relationship between those two birds than just regular portrait style isolated shots of each of them. All right, so if you're a wildlife photographer, I know that it's super tempting to, take your expensive 2.8 telephoto lens and just shoot it at its widest aperture, because that's what you paid for and you spent a lot of money on it. Or even if you're using like a more telephoto zoom lens with a more narrower aperture, it's very tempting just to shoot it at its widest aperture. But sometimes in wildlife photography, the story of what the animals are doing kind of trumps the, I guess, the technical side and the artistic side, where you have to kind of shift your mind going from what is like the most artistic image that I could get with this animal or this bird or whatever, and you have to shift it into more of like that Nat Geo documentary style of shooting, where you're just trying to literally document whatever is going on in front of you. And sometimes when you're documenting something that's happening right in front of you, those things are happening on two different focus planes, especially when it comes to like wildlife photography when you're shooting with telephoto lenses. So yeah, even if you own one of these super expensive 2.8 lenses, don't be afraid to stop down your lens if the situation calls for it. Some images are worth sacrificing that shallow depth of field, that's worth sacrificing a little bit of noise and a little bit of shutter speed in order to tell a greater story. I always like to remind myself that storytelling, and if your image tells a good story, it'll trump any sort of technical shortcomings from your image, whether that be like blurriness or noise or whatever. Definitely don't be afraid to throw all of the technical stuff out the window in order to just capture the moment the best way that you possibly can. And that kind of leads me into my conservation point here. We as photographers, we have a job to do. We have stories to tell about these beautiful birds and these beautiful creatures, and things that not even like the public may not necessarily see all the time, but also like the conservation community may not see images of both the Koa'e Ula adult and the Koa'e Ula fledgling in one shot. So it's super, super important that if we are out here in Mother Nature and we're documenting these beautiful creatures and their activities, that we showcase it the best way that we possibly can. And sometimes showcasing it the best possible way is not the most artistic way, if that makes sense. So going back to the sad, sad story that just broke about the 21 Koa'e Ula that were killed. It's good to see that the population, at least in this one particular area, seems to be doing okay. There still is a lot of activity, despite the fact that there were a lot of them killed. So that's good. And you know, the great thing about how unfortunate this thing is that the Koa'e Ula are not actually an endangered species. This is the only area that they do nest on Oahu, but globally their population is very, very stable. In fact, I believe their conservation status is of least concern. But that's not an excuse, right? That's, you know, seeing the damage that these feral cats have caused is just a prime example of how damaging these feral cats can be to our native bird population. And this is particularly a struggle on the Big Island, where Hawaii County Bill 51 is passing through the legislation. There's been like a lot of controversy between the birding community, as the birding conservation community, as well as the cat community. But essentially this bill would prohibit the feeding of feral cats on county property, which I think would be a relatively good thing for, you know, both the bird population as well as the cat population. In its current form, it has some loopholes. Essentially, it'll allow the cat organizations to promote certain individuals that are allowed to feed feral cats on their grounds, with very little oversight from conservation organizations and very little oversight from the state. Hello, there's a bird right in front of my head. Despite that, at least this bill is kind of a step in the right direction to at least have our public grounds being used for the conservation of our native birds instead of the destruction of our native birds, which is what I think public lands should be all about in the first place. You know, it should be all about, you know, promoting the health and well-being of our native ecosystem, not necessarily just one particular population and screw the rest of the other populations of all the other birds and animals and whatever, which is essentially what the cat people want. It's like, we just want the cat population to survive. Who cares about what anything else, you know, who cares about anything else, essentially. In fact, I have a very sad story to tell that I think I've told on this channel before, but a couple of years ago, we photographed a baby nene goose at Liliuokalani Botanical Gardens on the island of Hawaii. And it was later found out later on that year that that nene chick was killed by feral cats. So it's stories like that that are kind of pushing this bill through the legislature. But again, it's facing a lot of like resistance from the cat community. What is going on right now? It's so crazy. I have a quick little update on County Bill 51. Looks like it passed in the Hawaii County Legislature, which is good. So on the Big Island, it is now illegal to feed feral cats on county property, which is great great step in the right direction. And another great thing is that they got rid of that loophole that allowed cat agencies to certify people and to allow those people to feed feral cats on county property. So they just totally got rid of that section of the bill, which is great. Great news, great win for the birding community. And yeah, you know, it's just a quick little update. I know I had a lot of complaints the other day about that bill, but you know, maybe this bill is restoring a little bit of my faith in our government's system. That doesn't mean that the fight is over. There's still areas, especially back here on Oahu, that, like this coastline, that are under threat from feral cats. So definitely, if you're a photographer, if you frequent this area and you care about saving our native bird population, definitely get out there, remove cat bowls when you see them, enjoy the presence of our native birds, but also do a little bit to help to protect these birds from feral cats, and do what you can. Wow, this is nuts. You see all that? I hope you guys can see all that. Unbelievable. Photographing birds is fun. Posting it on social media is fun. You know, it's nice to see all the likes and engagement, especially if you are collaborating with these conservation organizations. But at the end of the day, I think it's more important that we share messages about the threats to these birds so that future generations have the opportunities to see them. You know, if I ever have kids, I want my kids to be able to have this sort of experience with these birds, because yeah, it's like crazy. It's unbelievable how close they're coming to me right now, how much of them there are in one particular area, and they're just going absolutely cuckoo bananas, you know, right in front of my face. And yeah, it would be a shame if all of this beauty were to just go away just to save some stupid feral cat populations, you know. It just doesn't make any sense. I think he agrees with me. So yeah, when you're posting on social media, especially if you photograph birds that, you know, have threats, make sure you share what those threats are and what people can do about it to, you know, help save these guys. But yeah, just wanted to make a little bit of an update video here on the Koa'e Ula. Hopefully you guys found this entertaining, educational, a little bit fun, you know. It's kind of sad, but it is bittersweet, but you know, I'm glad that I was still able to come out here and have a beautiful, fun experience despite the terrible news of 21 of these birds dying. But yeah, that's gonna about do it for me. If you like this type of content, this travel, vacation, a little bit of photography, education, hit that like button, comment below, subscribe if you aren't already. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.